Omolola. Let's start with you. Your story, how shall I say it? It describes the story of four main female protagonists. They are friends, and it spans around, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 years? See my mathematics. 100, and use the mic, please.
150.
150. And tell me first about what made you write a story that goes, actually there are several stories, and the time span is 150 years. So let's start maybe from the beginning. You mentioned something very interesting that I didn't know, and we had previously already in our previous talks the question about Yoruba culture, about traditions that we know or we don't know or have forgotten. And you mentioned one tradition about female being married to female at the beginning. Okay. Maybe you can share a bit.
Okay, so that's actually from Igbo culture.
Oh,
so
see?
If you see my name, my full name is Omolola Ijeoma Ogunyemi. My mother is Igbo, my father is Yoruba. And the first story, so the collection follows four young women from the 80s to 2050, but the anchor story, the kickoff story focuses on one of their step-grandmothers. And it's basically how I found out about that aspect of Igbo culture. I found out that my grandmother's older sister was once married to a woman, and that was allowed, that was a part of the culture at that time. Either if a woman couldn't have kids and she was wealthy enough to pay a dowry, a bride price, she could marry a woman. And the kids would follow her line, and the biological father would have no rights to those kids because he wasn't the one who paid the bride price. That blew my mind. So I was like, I have to write something about this. That has to be in a story. And then following the descendants, because I look at my grandmother's generation and how different my generation is from them, and then the ones coming behind, how different they are from us. But we're all Nigerians, and so it was just, I wanted to capture a little bit of that and do a little bit of speculative fiction going into the future about how things might be.
Yes, indeed, we will come to that. Speaking about traditions, that is something which was very permanent through your stories as well, in Call and Response, where it was about different individuals, female individuals as well, from Botswana. And I would like you to share a little bit the origins, the idea about writing about people in Botswana, also ordinary people, not like overly, yes, ordinary people.
Okay, so I guess as a writer, I'm very interested in just the lives of ordinary people, particularly ordinary women. I was born in the village of Sorowe, which is in the central district of Botswana. And I think that it's historically, it has a lot of historical significance to the politics of Botswana historically and even today in the contemporary moment. A lot of what happened in the past is sort of exerting pressure today on our contemporary politics today. I was always really interested in writing about Soroy because I find it such a fascinating place, because of the culture and the history, and all of the changes that have taken place, since colonialism, since independence, and how at some point Soroy was actually sort of a cosmopolitan place. Like a lot of people from, well, I don't know if cosmopolitan is the right word, but a lot of people from all over the place, like all over overseas, from Britain and the UK and the US, would come to Sorowe to teach as teachers. And one of the big historical stories about Botswana is the story of the first president of Botswana, who was married to a British woman, and the major kind of conflict that caused with Britain and with South Africa, because it sort of belied the idea of races not being equal. And so Botswana was seen as this, Botswana wanted to be this like non-racist place, or like this place that encouraged non-racism, whereas, when we're living during a time when there was like a lot of racism around us, in South Africa and Zimbabwe, and just like around in Namibia, what is now Namibia. So there's a lot of like historical events that took place in Sorowe, but I'm more interested in the lives of ordinary people, how those people were affected by those changes, and how they have managed to sort of keep, like I guess like how people have either managed to keep their traditions or like navigate the changes in how changing traditions throughout those like major historical moments. So yeah, and I guess I wanted to write about the place that I come from, the place that I know best, and the place that I love. So yeah, that's part of why I wanted to write those stories.
I think it's really beautiful when we think as in terms of what inspires us or what sparks our creativity. Is it the place where we grew up? Is it the place where we go? Is it the place where we studied? And I think in this way we are privileged, or we had so many authors in the room who have different locations from where they have sourced their, let's say, ingredients, so to say. And that one, both of you are in the US. So coming to that, I wanted to write about the place. I'd like to hear a little bit or understand a bit, what are the stories that influenced you? What are the stories, like either the stories that you heard yourself or you read yourself? I like a little bit of understanding what kind of shaped this a little bit, especially because of the different time spans you write about, and you as well, in terms of this is the place where I grew up. So I would imagine a lot of what you write is basically what you experience there in one or the other way.
I mean, my grandmother would often tell us stories, like the usual folk tales that most of us were told as we were growing up. So I don't know if I would say that the folk tales have, well, not in this particular book, but in my current work in progress, they've had some influence in that on that work in progress. In terms of this book, I was just really interested in the stories of just like ordinary people, right? So stories that I've heard from my family, things that I have observed with my own eyes, and I guess in terms of like literary influences, Bessie Head is one of my biggest literary influences because she also wrote about Sorowe, and she lived there for a long time. And I think that we're sort of interested in the same, like our thematic preoccupations, I think, are very similar, that we're both interested in like the lives of rural women, ordinary women, changing traditions and culture. So she's like my major literary influence.
Great. Omolola.
So I think I was influenced by many things. I've already mentioned family lore, but also my family moved to the US when I was 16, but I was born and raised in Ibadan, and I love Ibadan, and I wanted to feature that in some way. But my family was really big on travel, like traveling on the African continent before we ever set foot outside. So, we had trips to Zimbabwe, Botswana. I told her I've been to Sorowe. I've actually been to where she grew up, was born. Kenya and all these places, because they wanted to give us a grounding in what was Africa and Ghana and before we ever left the continent. And that stayed with me. So when I moved to the US, and you sort of experience a different reality, you start to, it's like the first time, many people say this and it sounds cliche, you don't think of yourself as Black for the most part, when you're in West Africa at least. But when you get to the US, you know you're Black. And they want, people tend to want to pigeonhole you in a certain way, and you want to be able to hold onto your culture and your stories and say, here's where I'm from, there's a rich tradition behind where I'm from, and here are stories that may not match what you are seeing on TV, but they're real, and I'm going to tell them. And so that was some of my motivation. So a lot of family lore, I went to FGGCOU. I have some of my FGGCOU people here. So the boarding school experience in the 80s in Nigeria was no joke, and so I definitely wanted to write about that. Yay. So it's a lot of different things.
Yes, the boarding house experiences, like some of them might know them maybe from home, or parents would tell them, but some of us who grew up totally in the West do not know that kind of, it's not the same concept of boarding. The only thing is it's a building where people sleep in. That is the kind of similarities, and that they're supposed to learn things. And your, basically, the story, as it continues, there is this friendship between the 4 protagonists, and it starts off very political activist. Friday for Future is nothing against what happened already in that time. So was that story, did you made it up, or was there elements of basically politically getting involved in getting better teaching quality by throwing stones? Is that something,
So,
how you handle things?
So it was actually inspired by some, not exactly, but some real events. I grew up on the campus of the University of Ibadan, and students were always protesting. So that was in the air. And the secondary school students were like, okay, they're standing up for something, so we can do the same. We could try. So I tried to channel some of that in this story. So it's fiction, but it's based on some of the actual reality at the time. I think younger people were really politically active, and still are, in Nigeria in those days, in a way that when I went to high school in the US, I think Abby mentioned this during her session about being surprised that, you know, people were so politically engaged when she came to school in Nigeria. I had the opposite. You know, I went to high school in the US, and I was like, they're so apathetic. They don't know anything about what's going on in the world. What is wrong with these people? And that was really my attitude. And so I wanted to feature some of that because Nigerian youth at that time were engaged because they thought they could shape their future. And they, you know, they had the confidence to move forward, whether or not they were right or wrong, to move forward and try to make change happen.
When you say at that time, can you give us a time frame again so that we...
Yeah, so in the time frame for the boarding school is in the 80s. So, yeah.
Yes, all right, just to put it in context and how we see political engagement among youth around the world. Right, so I'm interested a little bit about the characters and how they individually come to you, because you said I was interested in the life of ordinary people. So basically how did they come to you? Because in your stories you read them and you get a glimpse of their life and about the things that challenges them, and then it stops, leaving you to, and now? So what happens if a husband comes back and finds a 16-year-old child, for instance? So I feel like, how did maybe take us through the process?
Oh my God. So with my characters, most of them, with a lot of my stories, they mostly veer between Sorowe and Gaborone, which is the capital of Botswana. And so most of my characters are from Sorowe, and particularly from my ward, Gothataone ward, which is where I'm from. And I think that I was interested in, in women who want more from their lives, like who yearn for bigger things, like have bigger dreams beyond the circumstances, beyond the village, beyond what their families expect of them, and beyond what the traditions dictate of them. And so a lot of the characters are women that, I guess sometimes I think of them as like women that are plagued by the desire to be good and to be obedient and dutiful. And I think generally they try to be good, like they want to be good and dutiful and liked, but then they have these like internal desires of something bigger than them, something bigger than their village, something bigger than what tradition or what culture dictates of them. And so they have these dreams of like leaving the village, of like going beyond what their life is. And so they do that by different measures. Like sometimes they feel like they have to be a little bit deceitful, like they have to present this facade of goodness and obedience, with in the cover of darkness, maybe they're doing things that wouldn't be traditionally sanctioned or that wouldn't be considered good. So yeah, I guess that's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about women who want to go beyond their dreams and beyond the not their dreams but beyond the village and beyond what tradition has like expectations set for them by tradition and culture.
Thank you. I like the notion what you said, that women that want to go beyond their knowledge. However, when I read your book, what is basically in line is that even if you've left the place where you grew up, this quest for going beyond, for achieving more, kind of remains, and you crafted very beautiful in the different stages, different challenges, whether it is in relationships, whether it's in terms of relationships, whether it's in terms do I live my life in the US with, you mentioned one thing first, the realization that you are perceived as a black person, which adds another layer that you did not have before. It's adding to your problems. Before it wasn't, now it is. So my question here was, in how far did you find ways to portray this among the different worlds in that sense?
So one of the things, so the book, while it focuses mostly on the friendship of these four women, one of the things that's, I think, unique in the US, I don't see it to the same extent in the United Kingdom, is the fear of black men. And so there's only one story in the book that's centered around a male character, and that was to kind of illustrate some of the day-to-day, you're driving, you get pulled over, you're walking, you get pulled over because somebody said, there's a suspicious person in this space. You're not doing anything wrong. So I wanted to capture some of that. So the Shegun story in the collection does that, but Shegun is also linked to one of the girls from the boarding school. So we get to see through her eyes later how that plays out in his life. He's a professional, but there's, he could be at a meeting and say something and nobody listens. And then somebody else says the same thing he said, and they're like, oh my God, that's brilliant. And that's how it is. It's so subtle, passive aggressive sometimes, in a way where people are like, wait, did I imagine that? Did I not express myself correctly? Should I have phrased it in a different way? And in the book, what happens is someone from a different country with a different caste system basically comes in and says, didn't Shegun just say that? Yes. And so he knows, they heard me. they're just playing this game because they don't want to give me my due. So trying to express those kinds of concepts, which, sometimes when you're talking to family or friends back here, it can seem trivial, but it wears at you over time. And that's one of the things that I wanted to try to show.
Yes, I like the way how you, depending on which part of the world you live, obviously the concept of being afraid of the police or being pulled over in other places in Europe is less severe or minor. But also the place where you mentioned this exact system that you are either silenced or remained unheard. So I felt like you did a great job in, all right. So I like the part where you kind of, drew a picture about it. Maybe, since I've already kind of raved a bit about your books and about what the content is, maybe you might give us a little sample so that some of them can already start queuing up later. Which one? Don't cause any trouble. Only two. Don't worry, we'll reorder. Yes. Who wants to start?
I'll go first. So I'll read from the story. This is the opening story in the collection. It's called Gothataone. And essentially in the opening of the story, there's like a big wedding, and the main character, the narrator, Wikanyo, she's 15 years old and she's not allowed to go to the wedding because her aunt is sick and her mom wants her to stay at home and take care of the aunt. But she really wants to go to the wedding. And I'm just gonna read from the middle of the story, just like a couple of Just like one passage, I don't know, like 4 pages maybe? Okay, so this is from Gothataone. Outside, I stood on the veranda, but I still could not see anything. I went up to the gate, leaned my body against it. 2 boys came up the road talking loudly. When they saw me, they lowered their voices and turned and walked up to me. I recognized one of them, the one with the sides of his hair completely shaved off. He was fat, with round cheeks that made him look 12, and like he was on the brink of laughter. His friend was taller, wearing blue jeans and a t-shirt with the sleeves cut off. Eta, the boy I recognized, said to me. I assumed the angry and bored look are reserved for boys. I continued looking in the direction of the wedding, as if they had not spoken to me. Come on, baby, the tall boy said. Come on, talk to us. He was just as tall as I. His face was pockmarked from pimple scars. His bright red Converse All-Stars shoes matched his hat, as if he had come straight from a Kwaito music video. Baby, I said. Okay then, woman, he said while his fat friend giggled. What's your name, woman? What's your name, I asked. 16, he said. What kind of name is that? Tell her your real name, his friend said and giggled again, then looked at me. 16 is his football name. Okay, fine, he said. My name is Perseverance. I considered using one of the names I kept in rotation for moments like this. Simple common names that every other girl had. Neo, Mpo, Situnya. Sometimes I used Teboro, but I thought it was sweet that he told me the name that embarrassed him. I told him my real name. So where can one see you, Biganyo, he asked. I hated when boys talked like this to us girls, using a voice that was not really their own, a language they still felt uncomfortable in. But I liked the way he rubbed his hands together, as if he were nervous to be talking to me. I liked his plum dark lips. What do you mean, I asked. I was embarrassed by all the people walking past, seeing me talk to the boys. If I want to see you, he said, where could I see you? I don't know, I shrugged. I'm always home. He cocked his head to look past me at the house. I can come here and go knock on the door and ask for you. No, I scoffed. Papa had already cautioned my cousin Teboro and me against, as he called it, laughing with boys in corners. A heavily pregnant lady walked past, slow and lumbering, and I could feel my face growing hot at her lack of shame, showing that she had done it. In the distance, I saw Teboro walking back home. When she reached us, she opened the gate and closed it against the boys and stood beside me. She wrinkled her nose and said, what's going on here? 16's friend said, Eta. Teboro looked at him and said, aren't you Matiako's grandson? How's your grandmother? Oh, Sisi, the boy said and giggled. Come on, we're just talking. You're needed in the house, Teboro said to me. Come. She grabbed my arm and pulled me behind her. I knew that she thought she was rescuing me from the boys, but I did not want to be rescued. Biganyo, 16 called me. What do you say, BK? When we got into the house, we collapsed onto the sofa, giggling, careful not to wrinkle the cloths Mama used to cover the seats. I'm going to tell my uncle, Teboro said, that I woke up and found you kissing a boy right here inside his house. I threw a cushion at her. So what do you say, BK, she said, imitating 16. For sake, I said, tell me about the wedding. That bride, she's so beautiful, Shem, but her hair, what's wrong with her hair? It's just the pushback, she said. Can you believe it? Shame, so plain. I can't believe they think that hair is suitable. I knew where the conversation was going, so I tried to avoid it. What about the bridesmaids? What are they wearing? Oh, they're wearing these nice, bright orange two-pieces, Shem. The girls are all too dark for that color. Anyway, she said, getting up. I'm going to shower so I can go back. You just said the bride is plain and the bridesmaids' dresses. It's still fun, she said. I saw Peo and Mpo, my friends from school. I was sure that 16 and his friend had also been going to the wedding. Okay, I said, I'm going too. What about, she nodded in the direction of the patient's room. But me, I also want to eat my youth, I said. and she bent over to laugh. We had started this thing where we talked about our age as if it were a tactile thing outside of us, a thing not to be enjoyed at leisure, a thing to be gobbled up. Okay, she said, but I don't want to hear my name if you get in trouble. When she finished dressing up, I went into the patient's room. She had turned over. I helped her sit up in bed, propping pillows between her back and the wall. I avoided her eyes. I held the bowl of milk and porridge to her lips and supported the back of her head. I helped her lie back down. After I washed my face, Ntabo and I went into Mama's bedroom, whispering as if she could sneak in and catch us red-handed. We darkened our eyebrows with eyebrow pencils. We drew a mole above our lips, the only identical feature on both our faces.
Thank you very much. I shared particularly this part because it gave us a very nice entry, a feeling about, the place, Sorore.
Sorore.
It was just the same.
Yes. No, you said it exactly right.
Thank you. So I actually kind of liked it, and also the expressions you used with, I also like to eat my youth. And then tell us a little bit about the relationship between the patient, which is actually her aunt, as you said at the beginning.
Yeah. So in the story, the narrator's aunt, who is her mom's sister, is dying basically, and she's been sent back from a hospital to die at home. So the story takes place, I would say like in the mid-90s in Botswana, around 1995. So although the story doesn't mention it, but I think one can assume that she's dying of AIDS, essentially. This is before the introduction of antiretroviral program, the antiretroviral pills for everybody. And so a lot of people, if they contracted HIV and it progressed to AIDS, they would just eventually die. And so the aunt in this story has been brought back home and she's dying, and the family's kind of taking care of her through her last days. And she and Wiganyo used to be much closer. Wiganyo used to see her as like this figure of aspiration, as this sort of glamorous woman who, lived by herself and was very independent and had this kind of glamorous life. And whenever she came home, she brought this joy and glamour into her life and her mom's life. And now she's been kind of diminished into this figure who's just like prostrate all the time, and like her body has changed and everything. And so she now feels very ashamed and just essentially like embarrassed by her aunt, and just ashamed because at that time there was a lot of stigma for people dying of AIDS. And so she, because of this big wedding in the village on this day, her mom has to participate in like the duties of the woman, like as a married woman, at the wedding. And so she's asked Wiganyo to kind of stay home for the afternoon to just like stay with her aunt, but then she decides to just go to the wedding anyway. So it does become kind of a big deal, the fact that she seems not to care about her aunt anymore. Like that relationship has changed since she became sick and since she's been brought home to die. It kind of comes up later in Wiganyo's life, and Wiganyo is much older.
Thank you. Right, now off to Jollof rice and other revolutions.
So I was going to read a different passage, but one of my friends convinced me to read this one. So this is set in 1983, and it follows one of the girls, Nonso. For my first trip outside Nigeria, when I was 9, my mom and I took a Kenya Airways flight to Jomo Kenyatta Airport in Nairobi. Nairobi sounded to me like a city with lots of naira, a city where naira is their obi, their heart and soul. I knew they must be very rich. I told my mom this, and she shook her head. Nonso, how do you come up with this silly stuff? The name Nairobi has nothing to do with naira, and anyway, they use shillings in Kenya, not naira. I retreated to my book, really annoyed and determined to ignore her. I thought then that maybe I should have stayed at home with my dad. At least he'd take me to his physics lab and I could bother all the graduate students. He doesn't make me feel stupid the way my mom does sometimes. We spent 2 days in Nairobi, then we were off to Botswana. There was no direct flight from Kenya to Botswana. We had to fly to South Africa to catch another plane. We flew over an area with lots of blue and green, many, many swimming pools and nice lawns. Then we saw hundreds of brown and gray shacks, one after another. My mom said, "This is Johannesburg." She looked very upset. Our flight from Kenya was delayed, so by the time we landed at Jan Smuts Airport in Johannesburg, we'd missed the flight to Botswana for the day. My mom paced up and down. I'd never seen her so agitated. "I can't believe this," she said. "Nigeria has no diplomatic relations with South Africa because of apartheid. So we can't leave the airport. We'll have to spend the night here at Jan Smuts." She spat the name out like it was something dirty and flared her nostrils. I didn't see what was so bad about spending a night at the airport, and I was happy running around the terminal until I convinced myself that a uniformed guard with a machine gun was following me. I ran into the bathroom. When I emerged, I saw his scowling face, so I quickly found my mom and stayed glued to her side. "They have a hotel here," she said. "We won't have to lie down on the floor of the terminal." I was enjoying our adventure now that the armed man no longer seemed interested in me, and I didn't much care whether we slept on the terminal floor or in a hotel room. I had a lot to tell my friends in Ibadan already. A gray-faced woman with short hair that stood up took us to our quarters, a small room with a narrow bed and one window that looked out onto large gray concrete planters that sat empty and made me think of coffins. "This place is so ugly," I said to my mom. She was fuming about something. I didn't understand what, so I tried to cheer her up. Maybe a good meal would do the trick. "I'm hungry," I said. "Do you think they have amala with okra soup at any of the restaurants here?" She stared at me and started to laugh. When she could breathe again, she said, "Nonso, I'd love to see that starch-faced toad of a woman eat amala and okra. That would be something." We headed back toward the bustle of the terminal and sat at a restaurant. I noticed that all the servers were black, unlike the armed guard and the gray-faced woman. They seemed awed by my mother. "How old is your son?" our waiter asked my mother, smiling widely at me. At 9, I had very short hair, no breasts, and I was wearing a t-shirt and jeans, but couldn't he see my face? Everybody except my mom said I looked prettier when I cut my hair short. She'd wanted me to keep it long, but I thought I would have trouble finding someone to braid it for me in boarding school. "I'm not a boy, I'm a girl," I said very curtly. "Oh, I'm sorry, miss," he said, his eyes glinting in a way that told me he wasn't sorry at all. I saw your hair and I thought, my mistake. I could see he was trying not to laugh. I didn't see eba or amala or yam or anything remotely resembling real food on the restaurant menu. "Mommy, there's nothing for me to eat," I said. "You can't expect every country you visit to have Nigerian food," she replied. "Anyway, this menu is entirely British food." I scrunched up my nose and sulked until finally my mom ordered something for me. That was my first time eating steak and kidney pie. I hope that it is my last.
Thank you. So how are your taste buttons now? Do you like it? See, as we grow, our taste sometimes is more open to new things.
I like steak and kidney pie now.
I really actually like the idea or the notion of that you portrayed that children should see first places in Africa before they travel out. I think this concept was not necessarily before. It was like, oh, I'm going maybe overseas to the US, to the UK, Dubai. I heard as well is very, very kind of attractive. So tell me a bit more about the general travel and acceptance and the idea that you wanted to push forward by portraying that we went to different places in Africa.
Yeah, so one of the things that I was trying to do with that was basically showcase different places that I have been to. So it's like write what you know. So I've been to these places and I was able to write about them. But also, but fictionalized because the trips were a little bit different from what I portray. But also, just the notion of being curious about other cultures within Africa and having a sense of the differences so that when you're out and people are trying to lump you together like you're one place, you actually understand the differences, the beauty of the different places, and you can speak to that intelligently. I think that's a great thing.
Yes, I actually really like this, and this is also one of the things that makes Ake so special because it brings together people from so many different places, and you humble yourself in your own sort of, oh wow, and Botswana. I was so excited when I call you, knowing fully well you are the first author I've read from Botswana, and that finally, yeah. And then now, knowing I know different places in Botswana, I know how to pronounce them, I know different names, and that is deeply enriching and enlightening, and that is the things that we need, I think, in generally also to portray outside of the world that yes, Africa is not a country with a few neighboring islands. So I really love that idea. So is that something that you keep up? I mean, what's the next African country that you would like to visit?
After Nigeria?
Yes,
No.
Lagos.
No, so yeah, I've been back to, it's been very interesting. So the airport is now called the Oliver Tambo Airport. It's no longer, obviously, we're past that era. But I've been back to South Africa many times, and it's just been interesting to see. So I've been to Durban, I've been to Cape Town. It was for work, so it happened to be those particular locations, but always flying in through Johannesburg. And back to Ghana. Pretoria? Yeah. I don't know. People tell me Joburg is the place to be, but okay. I'll check out Pretoria. Yeah. But one of the things I would like to do is visit some of the, so I've been to Francophone countries. I haven't been to the Lusophone, I haven't been to Angola, I haven't been to Mozambique. So I don't speak Portuguese, but I still would like to see some of the other countries that I haven't yet been to.
Great choice. Mozambique and Angola is also on my list. What about you?
Senegal is on my list.
That's beautiful. I've been. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the Q&A. So please raise up your hands if you have, yes.
Hi. You know, yesterday we were told we weren't allowed to make statements, but I really would like to make a statement. And my statement is really towards Gothataone. You know, for the longest time, literature, there was no literature coming out of Botswana, actually. You'd go to Botswana and the only books you would find were books, like educational books, on how to wash your hands properly. How to avoid this and that, and I'm incredibly excited for you to be part of this literary world, and I can't wait to see you more. I want you to do more, always and always.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this encouraging statement. Who said you shouldn't make statements? Yes, please, I might like to add, it is time for questions, encouraging statements, empowering statements, blessings, compliments, all of them, we will take in it. Shyness? You're shy? Okay. Excuse me, this just.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for this session, very interesting conversation, I think. I'm interested in the connection between this idea of Africa, African storytelling, Africanness, and then all these differences that you are talking about here. Because also in other sessions, there's always this carpet or wallpaper of the African or the African storytelling, but often I get a little bit confused. What is it really? because here you are talking about all these differences between different places on the continent. So, but there's still this, there seems to be this need of phrasing the African also. But do you have any thoughts about that? Why is the concept of Africa important? Or how does it relate to the differences across this big area?
Okay, I'll take a stab at it. So obviously there's one thing that sort of unites us, and that's the experience of being colonized. And that is a violence on a people. And it makes it important to try to tell your stories. You can't go back to what was before, but you can try to look at the connections between what was before and what is now. And that's important to tell. And that differs from place to place, even though there's still some general themes in different societies about, elders, grandmother telling you a story. There's some themes that you find across different countries, but there's always some different specifics that are good to know because we're not, a monolith. And so I think that it's important in that way.
I don't know if I can answer this question. Well, I mean, if I can just make it personal to why I wanted to write stories about Botswana, partly what Tabiso is saying about there being such a dearth of stories or literature from Botswana for a very long time, and having a lot of contemporary stories or literature about Botswana being written by people from outside of Botswana, right? So for a long time, the most famous, yes, yes, Alexandra Smith, the #1 ladies detective agency, which did very well. I mean, we were talking about this yesterday. It did very well in the West, and it did very well in the UK and in the US, and honestly, it brought a lot of tourists to Botswana, so maybe there was in a pragmatic way, maybe it was very helpful. But I think that there's an issue if there's only one particular voice that we hear that's telling a story about a particular place. Even people are just like, oh, you're the first author from Botswana that I've ever read. And I'm like, okay, cool. But also there are other writers from Botswana. I'm not the only person, and I'm not interested in being the only person at all. I'm not interested in being the writer from Botswana because I'm not interested in being the voice of Botswana or anything like that because I don't think I can speak for the entirety of Botswana. Even in my stories, I very much constrain myself to my village and my ward and places that I know. So. To get back to your question, which I've now forgotten, I think I think that there is an oh my God, I wanted to say something about universality, stories being universal, having universal experiences. But obviously, there's something we need to hear specific voices from specific places and how that specificity sort of allows us to understand ourselves as human beings. I don't know what I'm saying, but I think you get the gist.
Exactly. Exactly.
Hello.
Yes. Yes, madam.
Let me apologize. You shouldn't have gone into that long explanation. I actually forgot what the question was about, but if it's why Africans writers are fascinated by Africans, I'm breathing. So we shouldn't explain ourselves, not here even in Ake. Nobody will ask a German, why are you writing about Germans? Nobody asks Europeans, why are you fascinated? There's some European literature that I find obscure, but I wouldn't ask them why. And And you are right, we are colonized. And we are not anthropological subjects. And frankly also, we are very, very fascinated by ourselves, thank God. Because we are only 60 to 70 years out of colonization. And if our writers want to masturbate with ourselves, why not? So please, if you are ever on a panel where this question, you do not have to answer it. Nobody should be asked to answer why are you fascinated with your home and with your people.
Thank you. Thank you for the. Oh, so yes. Okay.
I wanted to say, I actually thought that was a good question, and that's not what I got from his question. Maybe, disclaimer, I'm married to a German. No, seriously though, we were having a bit of a discussion here, and what I got from that very good question was, there is Africans telling the various types, the various experiences. But what is African storytelling? What is common to African storytelling is what I got. And as a reader, what I know that is common is our use of metaphor, our use of proverbs, our use of mythology. So even when it's not sci-fi or whatever, mythology, that bitch is going to be in there. The lyricism as well is what I think is common as somebody who reads. You can be reading anybody, but there's always going to be humor as well. There's going to be sex, brash, sex. So I think that's what I got from there. I don't know if anybody else got that type of thing from that question.
Thank you. Yeah. Which way? 1 second. Wait, now I see that there are a lot of people. 1, 2, and what's your name, gentlemen? Joseph. After. 1, 2, Joseph.
Okay, take me out of it. I'm just being facetious here. I'm just enjoying the debate between the two. But I'd just like to say that I really love the concept of masturbation, that's all.
Please reduce your honesty. I hope you haven't forgotten your question. Yes. The microphone.
Hello. It seems I'll probably bring a bit of seriousness to things, which I'm a bit sad about. But the question I had was connected to the threads I see with regards both your stories, which is about the complexity of the African woman, the girl child evolving to the African woman and those experiences. And, you've talked about how that has fueled your writing, right? And how that has, not directly translated into the characters, but has inspired the characters I've created. And what I was wondering is, what further complexities would you like to see in African storytelling for women and, children in, I don't know, maybe 20, 30, 50 years from now?
I would like to see more stories about African women navigating leadership with supportive African spouses. I would like to see more of those kinds of stories.
Same.
Yes, me too.
I'm sorry, I can't think of anything right now, but yeah.
Exactly, right? It doesn't always have to be trauma, right? Or African girls and being able to climb trees. And you know, the other time she said, I was like, that's true. My dad never allowed me to climb trees. It was just always like, what are you doing up there? Come down this instant. And I was like, it would be great to write a story about a girl like 9, and she's like, I like climbing trees. Maybe I'm connected to a tree spirit, and it's a way I bond with the tree. You know, like, it doesn't have to be serious, but just, it will be interesting to see the complexities of those experiences, and just sometimes serious, sometimes mundane, all part of, you know, sometimes funny, but all part of our experience.
I really love this question because it reminds me that this is what happens the second time I've come to Ake now. So many books, so many layers, so many complexity. Alone your story where one of the characters goes to, was it Czech Republic for a wedding? Poland? Poland. See, somewhere in the east. Goes to Poland. Gets robbed by a white guy that is a drug addict. I said, hey! From all the people she could meet, she gets robbed. And not that I want to see that. I like black people being robbed in stories, but yes, you think she's a tourist and she gets robbed. This guy takes her money. Very painful. And she gets it back, of course. Spoiler. No, but I love this question. I love the spark, and I love the great job that all of you authors are doing in actually adding layers constantly. Yes. Joseph!
The problem is that it wasn't really a question. It was It was following up with the previous question about is there such a thing as African storytelling, or is there too much diversity? Or is there so much diversity that there's no single notion? That was what I got from that question, whether we have such a thing as African storytelling, or are we talking about the diversity of experiences within the continent? Which is it that we're pushing for here? Because the last 2 days he seemed to have been hearing both sides. And I think in response to that, and I think it's a good question, is both. I think both can exist equally. I don't think they're antithetical notions. We've heard about South American literature, we've heard about European literature, but no one would assume that a Polish story is the same as a French story. So why should we have to choose either one African narrative or diversity? So what we're saying is there's so much diversity, there's so many different layers, and yes, there is an African narrative. And what does that mean? Stay tuned and find out, because it's changing. It's changing.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph. Who was the next question? Yeah, please raise up your hand so that we can see the hands. She is behind the pillar. Microphone, please, behind the pillar. Okay. 1 second, the microphone is on its way.
Hello, everybody. I must say that I'm here for Lola. I saw her last 34 years ago. We were in secondary school together. And Lola, let me tell you why I'm here today. I'm a very busy person. I'm from a program, and I'm going to another program. But when I knew you, you were quiet, and you were a science student. So I honestly can't get my head around how you became a storyteller. And I told myself, if there's any reason to be here, I need to ask you, how did you guys get here? No, I must tell you this. I'm very proud of you. Lola, you. You know, but sincerely, I have like 5, 6 books that I've written and I never got to publishing. And I know what it entails, you guys, Africans, being out there trying to make a living, trying to make life for yourselves. And you come about what you have brought together. And I told myself, I'm a lion, and I told them, I'm going to fashion you guys. I have somewhere to go to. And I really need to ask you, how did you guys get here? What is the drive? I know I've missed a lot of things. Maybe you have answered the question, but I really need to know, what is the drive? How did you get here? Thank you.
So, thank you for that question. It's a really great question. In Form 3, I don't know if it's still done that way, but JS3, you have to pick whether you're in the arts track or the science track. I like the sciences, I picked the sciences, but I loved literature too. And looking back, I think it's actually a travesty that you had to pick, because I think people can do both. And so I am living proof that you can be a scientist and a writer. So one of the reasons she's surprised, my academic career, the book took me 15 years to write because I essentially made it from instructor to full professor as a biomedical informatician while writing this book. My career is in informatics, yeah. But I was always inspired by stories. I always read voraciously, and I didn't see why I had to choose, why I had to leave one thing behind. So I'm living proof you can do both. But it's not easy, but you can do both.
Yeah, I was also a quiet child who spent a lot of time by herself and like playing by herself. And I think that, you know, like because I was playing by myself, I had like make-up stories. You know, I would play with rocks and like make up stories about the rocks. And then eventually I started reading a lot, and then I started trying, you know, I read a lot of Edith Blyton. So I started trying to write stories similar to hers, and then I just kind of kept trying to write throughout, as I was, you know, it was a dream that I kept, that I sustained throughout my life until, you know, now I have a book.
This is how it goes. So our time is up. Thank you so much. You've been wonderful and amazing. You did not fail. Honestly, I can count on you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Omolola. Gothataone. Thank you.